right now, right this second, something is happening between the United States and Canada that most Americans are not paying attention to. And I need you to understand why that is a massive mistake. Because what is unfolding right now is not just a diplomatic spat between two neighbors, it is a fundamental reshaping of the most important economic and security relationship this country has ever had. And the man at the center of pushing back against the president of the United States is not some career politician playing games. He is a former central banker, a man who ran the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada, a man who thinks in terms of systemic risk and financial architecture. And his name is Mark Carney. And he just stood on a world stage and told everyone watching that the old world order, the one America built and led for 80 years, is dead and that it is not coming back. And I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, why it matters to you and your wallet and your future, and why the White House clearly did not see this coming. So if you care about where this country is headed, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because over the next 30 minutes, I am going to give you the full story that the mainstream coverage is barely scratching the surface on, and you are going to want to hear every single word of it. Let me take you back to January 20th, 2026, Davos, Switzerland, the World Economic Forum, where every year the richest and most powerful people on the planet gather in a small alpine town to discuss the future of the global economy. And normally these speeches are forgettable. They are full of corporate buzzwords and empty optimism. Nobody remembers them a week later. But this year, something genuinely different happened, because Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, walked up to that podium and delivered what multiple international commentators are calling one of the most significant foreign policy speeches in years. Der Spiegel in Germany called it the speech the world has been waiting for. The Washington Post called Carney the star of Davos. The New York Times columnist Ezra Klein called it the most important foreign policy speech in years. Former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull praised its enormous influence, and a French entrepreneur said it may prove to be one of the most important speeches made by any global leader over the past 30 years, one that will be remembered in history books centuries from now. And I want you to understand what he actually said, because it was not just about Canada. It was about every single country that has relied on the United States for stability, for trade, for security, for the basic architecture of how the modern world works. Now, before I get into the speech itself, you need to understand who Mark Carney is, because his background is what makes him uniquely dangerous from the White House's perspective. This is not your average politician who stumbled into office. This is a man who served as governor of the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial crisis and was widely credited with steering Canada through that crisis better than almost any other developed nation on earth. And then he became the first non-British citizen ever to serve as governor of the Bank of England, one of the most prestigious financial positions in the world, where he navigated the chaos of Brexit. And after that, he joined Brookfield Asset Management and built a network of relationships across global finance and government that very few people on the planet can match. And when he entered Canadian politics in early 2025, it was not because he needed a job or wanted fame. It was because Donald Trump's tariffs and annexation threats had created what Canadians viewed as an existential crisis for their country. And Carney won the Liberal Party leadership on the first ballot with almost 86% of the vote. And then he won the federal election in April 2025 by campaigning explicitly against Trump, telling Canadians that Trump is trying to break us so he can own us. And his first official trip as prime minister was not to Washington, which is the traditional move for a new Canadian leader. It was to Europe to meet with Macron and Starmer about trade diversification and security cooperation. And that decision alone tells you everything about how fundamentally this relationship has shifted. So what did Carney actually say at Davos? Well, he opened by referencing the Czech dissident Václav Havel, who wrote an essay called The Power of the Powerless, about how the communist system sustained itself through people going along with a lie, putting signs in their windows that they did not believe in. And Carney drew a direct parallel to the way countries like Canada have lived under the American-led international order, knowing it was imperfect, knowing the rules were enforced unevenly, knowing the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, but going along with it because it mostly worked. And he admitted openly that the story of the rules-based order was partially false, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically, that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim, and that was a stunning admission from a sitting G7 leader on a world stage. And then he said the words that sent shockwaves through that room. He said, "We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition, and that the old order is not coming back." And he said, "Nostalgia is not a strategy." And he said that great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, and supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. And he called on middle powers around the world to stop waiting and start building something new. And he said a country that cannot feed itself, fuel itself, or defend itself has few options. And when the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself. And he announced that in 6 months, he had signed 12 trade and security deals on 4 continents, doubled Canada's defense spending, and begun forming buyers clubs for critical minerals so the world could diversify away from concentrated supply chains. The room gave him a standing ovation, which multiple attendees said is essentially unheard of at Davos. Canada's former UN ambassador Bob Rae said he had never seen a global reaction to a speech like it. Finland's president called it one of the best speeches at Davos. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said it was evidence that Canada is back. And California Governor Gavin Newsom said multiple American leaders sent him transcripts and that America needs to call this out with clarity. Now, here is where it gets deeply personal and where the White House clearly got rattled, because the very next day, President Trump took that same stage at Davos, and reporters said he looked tired and his flight had been delayed. And he started with self-promotion about the American economy and what he called avoiding the Green New Scam. But then he turned his attention directly to Canada. And he did not hold back. He said, "Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful." And then he said, "I watched their prime minister yesterday. He was not so grateful." And then came the line that made headlines in every country around the world. Trump said Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. And I want you to really sit with that for a moment, regardless of your politics, because those are the words of the President of the United States publicly telling the leader of our biggest trading partner that their country only exists because of us. And in that same speech, he talked about taking Greenland, whether they like it or not, and building new battleships. And one commentator described it as a gangster mindset where Trump was effectively saying, "Nice country, Mark. Be a shame if something happened to it." Carney had already left Davos without meeting Trump. He flew back to Quebec City and delivered a national address looking directly into the camera, and his response was measured but powerful. He said Canada and the United States have built a remarkable partnership in the economy and security and in rich cultural exchange, but Canada does not live because of the United States. Canada thrives because we are Canadian. And he said we are masters in our home. This is our own country. It is our future. The choice is up to us. And he said in a time of rising populism and ethnic nationalism, Canada can show how diversity is a strength, not a weakness. And he called Canada a beacon and an example to a world that is at sea. And within hours, Trump fired back by revoking Canada's invitation to join his Board of Peace. And then he posted an altered image showing a map with Canada, along with Greenland, Venezuela, and Cuba, all covered by the American flag. And you could feel the diplomatic temperature between these two countries dropping in real time. But here is the thing that I think most Americans are completely missing. And this is critical. This is not just about words and hurt egos and diplomatic theater. This is about real money, real jobs, real consequences that are already hitting both countries hard. So let me give you the numbers because they are staggering. The United States and Canada trade roughly $700 billion worth of goods and services every single year, making Canada one of our top 2 trading partners on planet Earth. And right now, there are tariffs in place that are actively disrupting that relationship at every level. Less than 2 weeks after returning to the White House in January 2025, Trump hit Canadian goods with a 25% tariff, citing concerns about drug smuggling. Then in March 2025, separate 25% tariffs took effect on all global steel and aluminum imports, which hammered Canadian producers. And in August, he raised the general tariff to 35%. and economists estimate the entire tariff cycle has already reduced Canadian GDP by 1.5% to 2%, and Canadian households are absorbing $1,700 to $2,000 in higher costs annually. And here's what this means for you as an American right now, not in the future, right now. General Motors has told its investors that it expects $3 to $4 billion in tariff costs in 2026, and those costs get passed directly to you at the dealership. Economists estimate that steel and aluminum tariffs alone could add $1,500 to the cost of a single car manufactured in America. Companies like Ford have scrapped plans for vehicles like the F-150 Lightning pickup. Stellantis is shifting $13 billion of investment into U.S. facilities while cutting Canadian operations. But here is the thing people miss. The North American auto supply chain is so deeply integrated that parts cross the border dozens of times before a car is assembled. So disrupting one side raises costs on both sides. And a 42-year-old tooling company in Ontario called John Engineering says this is the worst they have ever seen in 4 decades. Their owner told reporters, "We are just trying to stay alive." And another company, Narmco, has seen its workforce drop from 1,400 to below 1,200. And a food company called Dainty Foods delayed a new U.S. plant because of what their CEO called pure panic mode. And a brand new poll from the Angus Reid Institute released just this week tells a remarkable story. 63% of Americans believe Trump's tariffs are mostly being paid by Americans themselves, either by consumers at 56% or businesses at 7%, and only 13% think foreign governments are bearing the cost, and 51% of Americans now say there should be no tariff on Canadian goods at all. That is up 9 points from before the election, and here is the really telling number. Even among MAGA Republicans, more prefer a minor tariff at 48% than a major one at 20%. And Americans by a 2-to-1 margin want to keep the existing USMCA deal rather than breaking it apart. So even the president's own base is not enthusiastic about going this hard against our closest neighbor. And beyond the economic numbers, there is a cultural rupture happening that is truly unprecedented between these two countries. Canadian travel to the United States dropped 40% and has not recovered. Ski resorts in Vermont like Jay Peak are seeing Canadian bookings down 45%, with hockey teams sitting out American tournaments. Folk music conferences in New Orleans went from 17% Canadian attendance to just 5%. Real estate agents in Florida report Canadians selling vacation homes. Thousands turned out for elbows-up protests in Toronto at Nathan Phillips Square. Ordinary Canadians are checking grocery store labels to avoid American products, boycotting bourbon and wine, canceling concert trips across the border. And one Ontario woman told CNBC, "Enough is enough. Why do we have to make you great again at our expense?" And what makes this so powerful is that none of this is government organized. This is happening organically from the bottom up because 38 million Canadians are genuinely angry in a way that could take a generation to heal. Now, let me bring you up to speed on the most recent developments because this story is moving fast. On March 6th, for the first time since Trump blew up trade talks last October, and he blew them up because he was angry about a Canadian TV ad that featured former President Ronald Reagan criticizing tariffs. Yes, Reagan's own words about free trade ended bilateral negotiations. But now Canada's Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc has sat down face-to-face with U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer in Washington, and Canada has overhauled its entire negotiating team with Janice Charette as chief negotiator and Mark Wiseman as the new ambassador. And the USMCA trade review this year is the single biggest flashpoint because Trump has floated pulling out entirely or breaking the deal into separate agreements with Canada and Mexico. Then there is the China factor, which has added rocket fuel to the tensions. Carney traveled to China earlier this year and brought back a deal. Canada would lower its 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles to about 6% with an initial cap of 49,000 vehicles, growing to 70,000 over 5 years. And in exchange, China would drop punishing tariffs on Canadian agricultural products like canola oil, which went from 85% down to 15%, along with canola meal, lobster, crab, and peas. And Carney presented it as a practical move to help Canadian farmers who were getting crushed. But Trump absolutely erupted. He posted on Truth Social saying, "If Governor Carney thinks he is going to make Canada a drop-off port for China, he is sorely mistaken." And he threatened a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods. And he even posted that China is completely taking over Canada and he hopes they leave ice hockey alone. And notice he called Carney governor, not prime minister, which is a deliberate insult he uses to deny Canadian sovereignty. And Treasury Secretary Bessent backed him up on ABC, saying, "We cannot let Canada become an opening for cheap Chinese goods." But Carney responded calmly, saying Canada has no intention of a free trade agreement with China, and everything was consistent with the existing CUSMA framework. And just this week, just days ago, Trump added more fuel to this fire by posting on Truth Social calling Carney the future governor of Canada while discussing an environmental initiative about Asian carp in the Great Lakes, literally listing American governors of Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Ohio, New York, and then adding the future governor of Canada, Mark Carney, treating a sovereign nation's leader as if he were already a state governor. And this comes after Trump has repeatedly posted altered maps showing Canada covered by the American flag. And Rachel Maddow has been covering this story extensively. She traveled to Vancouver on March 5th for a forum at UBC called America First, America Alone, where she addressed Trump's rhetoric toward Canada, the Gordie Howe Bridge dispute, the tariff chaos, and the broader question of what happens when America pushes away its closest allies. And her show's blog has tracked the pattern of announce, then delay, then modify, then escalate that has created an environment of such profound uncertainty that businesses on both sides of the border cannot plan or invest. Now, I also want to address something important about the information environment around this story, because there has been a flood of fake and AI-generated content, and you need to be aware of it. Snopes, the fact-checking organization, has debunked multiple viral YouTube videos claiming things like Carney walking out of the White House after Trump triggered a North American economic crisis, and these videos use fabricated scenarios, AI-manipulated footage, fake quotes from real commentators, and dramatic thumbnails with explosions near government buildings, and the channels producing them follow a formula with titles like 1 minute ago or urgent update, followed by sweeping claims with zero basis in reality. And I am telling you this because the real story is dramatic enough. The verified facts are genuinely unprecedented. You do not need fabricated content when the truth is this extraordinary. And I want to connect this to the broader geopolitical moment, because what is happening with Canada does not exist in a vacuum. Right now, the United States is simultaneously engaged in a military conflict with Iran that has produced contradictory statements from the administration about whether the war is over or just beginning. Trump told CBS he thinks the war is very complete, then held a press conference where he contradicted himself. And his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, said it is just the beginning. And reporting from the Washington Post and AP has revealed that Russia is providing Iran with targeting information to attack American forces in the Middle East. And Trump had an hour-long phone call with Putin that we only learned about because the Kremlin told us the White House did not announce it. And Trump has publicly insulted the United Kingdom by telling them he does not need their aircraft carriers. And he has threatened European allies with tariffs over Greenland. And across the globe, the message that allies are receiving is that partnership with the United States under this administration is transactional at best and punitive at worst. And this is exactly what Carney named at Davos when he said compliance will not buy safety, that accommodating great power pressure does not protect you. And that message is resonating far beyond Canada. It is resonating in capitals across Europe, Asia, the Pacific, and the global South. And the irony is that by trying to bully Canada into submission, Trump may have accidentally created the most effective spokesperson for a post-American world order that the international community has seen in decades, because Carney has the credibility of a former central banker, the platform of a G7 leader, and the motivation of a man whose country is being publicly threatened with annexation. I also think it is important to talk about what this means for American national security, because that angle gets almost no coverage. Canada is not just a trading partner. Canada is a defense partner at a level that most Americans do not even realize. NORAD. The North American Aerospace Defense Command is a joint U.S.-Canadian operation that defends this entire continent from air and missile threats. Canadian forces have fought alongside American soldiers in every major conflict since World War I. 458 Canadian soldiers died in Afghanistan serving with American troops. Canadian energy supplies heat American homes and fuel American airports. The Gordie Howe Bridge, which Trump threatened to block, is a $4.6 billion infrastructure project critical to the flow of goods between Michigan and Ontario. And if this relationship continues to deteriorate, the implications for continental defense are genuinely alarming. And Carney has already begun reviewing Canada's planned purchase of American F-35 fighter jets and investing in independent Arctic defense capabilities, including submarines and radar systems. And that is a sentence that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago, but is now being discussed openly in Ottawa as basic common sense. So where does this all go from here? Well, the USMCA negotiations are the biggest thing to watch, because if those talks break down or Trump pulls out entirely, every Canadian export could face blanket tariff rates, and that would be an economic earthquake for both countries. And the Brookings Institution just published a major analysis asking whether Canada is on a forked road away from North America, and concluded this is the most consequential moment for the bilateral relationship in at least a generation. Canada's share of exports going to the United States has already fallen to 71.7%, the lowest since the early 1980s. And remarkably, for the first time ever, Canada exported more seaborne crude oil to China than to the United States in April. And Canada is exploring alternatives to buying American F-35 fighter jets. And Carney has declared that the 80-year era when the United States embraced global economic leadership and championed free exchange is over. And whether you agree with that or not, the consequences are going to be felt in every American household for years to come, in the price of your car, the cost of your groceries, the security of your energy supply, the stability of the northern border, and the future of North American defense. And I want to leave you with this thought because I think it captures what is really at stake here. For as long as any of us have been alive, the US-Canada border has been the most peaceful, most productive, most economically valuable border on Earth. Two countries that share a language, share values, share family connections, share an entire continental economy. And it has worked so well for so long that most Americans take it completely for granted. We do not think about where our electricity comes from. We do not think about where the steel in our cars was milled. We do not think about who is watching our airspace alongside our Air Force. We do not think about the Canadian nurses who cross the border every day to work in American hospitals, or the American students who attend Canadian universities. And all of that, every bit of it, is now at risk. Not because of some external threat, not because of terrorism or a foreign invasion, but because of a policy choice being made right here in Washington. And that should concern every single American, regardless of who they voted for. Because when you lose your best friend, your most reliable partner, the country that has had your back through every crisis for 100 years, you do not get them back with a tweet. You do not rebuild that trust in a news cycle. That is generational damage. And we need to talk about it honestly. And listen, if you have stayed with me for the last 30 minutes, then you understand that this story is far more significant than most people realize. This is not just a personality clash between two leaders. This is a structural reshaping of the economic and security foundation of an entire continent. And it is happening in real time. And if you want to stay informed with verified facts, not clickbait, not AI-generated fake stories, but the actual documented truth of what is unfolding between the United States and Canada, then I need you to hit that subscribe button right now, tap that notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because this story is just getting started, and the decisions being made right now will determine whether the most successful bilateral relationship in modern history survives or fractures permanently, and you deserve to know the truth about it before it hits your bank account. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.